Hello and welcome to the Advanced Placement World History Podcast. This is episode 21, Industrialization in Great Britain. It's popular in world history to say that really there are only two big turning points in history, the Neolithic Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, because really these are the two events that dramatically reshaped the way most human beings in the world live their lives. So the topic of this podcast is the Industrial Revolution, specifically the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. By this point, you've done the textbook readings, and what I want to do with this podcast is just provide some synthesis of that information. Specifically, I want to look at the factors that led to the Industrial Revolution and what the initial impact of the revolution was on people living in Great Britain. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution and the Neolithic Revolution both dramatically reshaped human lives, but the Industrial Revolution was a little different. We know that agriculture developed independently in at least 6 places around the world, but industrialization emerged in just one place, Western Europe, specifically Great Britain. From Great Britain, industrialization spread all over the world, obviously much more rapidly than the Neolithic Revolution. By the time the Industrial Revolution happened, there was already this large global trading network in place with the Indian Ocean trade, the Columbian Exchange, Trans-Saharan trade, the Silk Road, all those trade routes, trade networks that we discussed in the class. This might be an overgeneralization of the world, but today the world is divided into rich and poor countries, with richer countries having fully developed industrial infrastructure and poorer countries really lacking this infrastructure but often trying to put it into place. And you often hear people talk about countries this way as developed countries and developing countries, poor countries in general being referred to as the developing world. And there's certainly an assumption that exists in this language. These countries are poor now, but they're on their way to becoming richer countries because they're developing. And what we're moving to is a period of global industrialization where all countries will be industrialized and will enjoy all the benefits of living in an industrialized world. Critics of this idea argue that industrialization has really created a world that's going to be permanently divided into rich and poor countries. Just based on the economic model, there's only room for so many people at the top. But that the process of industrialization is going to continue, but the world's going to stay divided between rich and poor countries. And a third view would argue that we're actually approaching the end of an era, that right now in the early 21st century we're coming towards the end of the era of industrialization because ultimately our lifestyle is unsustainable and the environment will basically not allow us to continue consuming at the rate we are doing today. But up until 1750 or even 1800, Great Britain didn't have any technological edge over the traditional Eurasian powers, China, India, the Islamic world. Instead, these powers were roughly equal with Europe up until the 1800s. And in the 1800s, Europe really forged ahead and took the lead. And if you have to isolate one great breakthrough, one invention, it would probably have to be the steam engine. Steam engine essentially provided a limitless source of power beyond the sources of power that had traditionally been used: wind, water, muscle. Steam engine could be used to power machines in factories. It could be used to drive railroads. It could be used to drive steamships. So with the Industrial Revolution, we see improvements in iron and steel production, improvements in railroads, steamships, electricity, the telegraph, and the telephone. Along with all of this, along with the Industrial Revolution, came a second agricultural revolution. So industrialization really changed agriculture. Machines replaced the work of human labor. So it lowered the demand of farming jobs, freed up more people to go work in factories, and then new technologies, fertilizers, pesticides, refrigeration, all these things improved crops, and improved crop output would eventually contribute to massive population growth. So from Great Britain, industrialization first spread to Western Europe, then the second half of the 1800s to Russia, the United States, and Japan, And in the 1900s, the global or industrial revolution becomes global, spreading to Asia and Latin America. So, some questions that historians try to answer are, why did the Industrial Revolution happen? Why did it happen in Europe, not in the rest of the world? Why did it happen in Great Britain first, before the rest of Europe? And why did it happen in the late 18th and 19th centuries? So, the first Western explanations that came out that tried to explain this always focused on some unique, deeply rooted feature of European society that made industrialization possible. Now, from our world history perspective, this is really a Eurocentric way of looking at the world. And we need to understand the Industrial Revolution did not happen in Europe because Europe was smarter or harder working in general than the rest of the world. And we know this because of three things. First, other parts of the world had golden ages of science and technology. One of the golden ages in the Islamic world was between the years 750 and 1100. And during this time, the Islamic world generated major advances in shipbuilding, major advances in hydropower, paper making, textile production, a whole bunch of things. India was a global center for cotton production for a long time. It was the first place to create crystallized sugar from raw sugar cane. Lots of mathematical discoveries coming from India. More than either of these, China was the world leader in technology between the years 700 and 1400. So that's 700 years, Tang and Song dynasties. That's a long time. So if we say the Western world has been the world leader in technology since, say, 1800, that's only a little over 2 centuries, and even now we see both India and China making a major comeback in the global economy. So the suggestion that the Western world's position of power is a natural condition and due to something inherently European is probably flawed. For one reason or another, all the bloomings of technology in the Islamic world, India, China, had slowed down or stagnated in the early modern era. But all the innovation leading up to this would suggest that Europeans weren't in some place where they were the only ones that were capable of inventing. So they weren't in this unique position. Secondly, historians have looked at what life was like in the Ottoman Empire, in Qing Dynasty China, in India, all around the year 1750. So what were these places like around the time the Industrial Revolution broke out? And what they found was that life expectancies, wage levels, living standards, the types of goods people consumed were really all quite similar to Europe. So even on the eve of the Industrial Revolution, Europe had no obvious economic advantage over the Eurasian powers. And the final reason for doubting that industrialization was because of something uniquely European, or Europeans were uniquely suited to take on industrialization, is how fast industrialization spread over the past 250 years. So industrialization has taken place in Japan, China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, South Korea, and on and on and on. So the suggestion that it's European culture only that was uniquely suited to industrialization doesn't really hold up. So what were the factors then that were unique to Western Europe that can probably go a long way in explaining the Industrial Revolution? First off, is the issue of political fragmentation. In Europe, there were many small, highly competitive states that took shape in the 12th and 13th centuries, and the competition kind of guaranteed that economic stagnation wouldn't take place. People would need to keep inventing things. There's really a climate of competitiveness and of innovation. This political fragmentation wasn't there in the Ottoman Empire, Qing Dynasty China, the Mughals in India. These were much bigger empires. So if this point is true, it means that Western Europe's failure to recreate the Roman Empire after the fall of the Roman Empire actually turned out to be an advantage for Europe. And this was really something that rulers in Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire were trying to do since the fall of the Roman Empire. Second reason that's put forward is that European states and monarchies were in close alliances with the merchant class. And this is partly because monarchs in Western Europe were often strapped for cash and looking for ways to raise money. So merchants in Britain, for example, were given special privileges, trade monopolies, given permission to collect taxes in exchange for giving loans to the state, for paying the state, basically. So because of this relationship, it was always in the best interest of governments to encourage commerce, encourage innovation. So we have states giving charters to private trading companies in exchange for money. For example, the British East India Company was a private corporation that paid the government for the privilege for their monopoly. European merchants, more than merchants in the Ottoman Empire, Mughal India, and China, had an unusual degree of freedom, and there are even certain cases where merchants controlled the entire state. So examples of this are in Holland and the city-state of Venice. A third point is that Europe became a hub of international commerce, and Europe really put themselves in a position to draw disproportionately from world resources, and we see this process emerge in the early modern era, begin to emerge in the early modern era. Almost simultaneously, really, Europe pushed their way into the Indian Ocean trade, which was the richest trading network in the world, and then they took control of the Americas. And it's important to remember Western Europe, more than China, more than India, more than the Ottoman Empire, had strong motivations for pursuing maritime expeditions. They were trying to break into the richest trade in the world, a trade that the other world powers were already a part of. And the centrality to the world trade markets absolutely helped the Industrial Revolution. A lot of the technologies that Europe used in the Revolution were adapted from earlier technologies established in the Islamic world in China. More than anything, it was silver from the Americas that made Europe relevant in Asian markets. Europeans also found other resources, timber, fish, maize, potatoes, that helped sustain the growing population. So their ability to take resources from other parts of the world and use them usefully aided the Industrial Revolution.